All right, let's dive into this, shall we? Today's deep dive is all about the psychology of money by Morgan Housel.
Oh yeah, this is a good one. This one really gets you thinking.
Yeah, it's not your typical finance book. It's not about, becoming a Wall Street wizard or memorizing formulas. It's more about understanding the psychology behind our decisions about money.
Yeah.
Why do we do the things we do with it?
Exactly. Instead of just, throwing numbers and charts at you, it really digs into the human side of money.
Like, why is it that sometimes, even when we know what the smart financial move is, we end up doing something totally different?
Right, right. Like we know we should be saving more, but then that new phone comes out and suddenly, poof, there goes the savings.
Yeah, exactly. Housel says it's because our personal stories, our backgrounds, those little moments that shaped our views on money, they all play a huge role.
It's like we all have these invisible scripts running in the background, influencing every financial move we make, often without us even realizing it.
So are you saying, like, nobody's really crazy when it comes to money? It's all about our experiences.
That's one of the big points Households makes, yeah. Our decisions, even the ones that seem totally irrational, they start to make sense when you view them through the lens of personal experience.
So, like, someone who grew up, let's say, during a recession, watching their family struggle, might hold on to money really tight.
Exactly. Or, on the flip side, someone who grew up in a really wealthy family, always having everything they needed, they might be more comfortable taking financial risks.
Okay, that makes sense. So then how do we even start to figure out those biases, those invisible scripts you're talking about?
Yeah, it's tricky, right? It's like, how do you see your own blind spots? That's where self-awareness comes in, Housel says. You got to acknowledge those biases exist and that we all have them to some degree.
So, like, thinking back on your own decisions, have you ever made a money choice that you're like, whoa, why did I do that?
Oh, yeah, for sure. We all have, right? But instead of just beating yourself up about it, try to look back and see if you can spot the bias that might have led you there.
All right, let's talk about one of the big ideas from the book, the one Housel keeps coming back to, compounding. He calls it the greatest show on earth.
Mm.
And he makes a pretty strong case for it. He uses Warren Buffett as a prime example, right? The majority of Buffett's wealth was made after he turned 50.
That's the thing about compounding. It takes time. It's that snowball effect applied to money. The longer you let it roll, the bigger it gets.
Yeah, but that's the problem, isn't it? Our brains are wired for instant rewards, like, give me the dopamine hit and now W.
Yeah, our brains aren't really built for long-term thinking. That's why a lot of people, we struggle with the whole delayed gratification thing.
But if we can learn to be patient, that's where the magic happens, like with investing and all that.
Absolutely. Patience is like
Yeah.
the secret ingredient. You got to resist that urge to jump on every hot stock tip or, chase those quick wins.
Right. It's more like planting a seed, right? Nurturing it, letting it grow. You're not going to see the massive tree overnight.
It's a marathon, not a sprint. You got to be consistent, disciplined. It's not always flashy or exciting, but it pays off in the long run.
This makes me think of all those get-rich-quick schemes out there. Housel would probably say those are playing on our, our impatience.
Oh, absolutely. They prey on that desire for instant gratification. And look, some people get lucky, but for most of us, that's not how it works.
So it's more about slow and steady, building wealth over time. Okay, got it. Now, Housel also talks about this whole idea of luck versus risk, right? And how both of those can play a role in financial success, or failure for that matter. He says we tend to misinterpret them, though.
Yeah, like when things go well, we pat ourselves on the back and say, oh, look at me, I'm so smart, I made all the right choices. But when things go south, it's like, oh, it was just bad luck, nothing I could have done.
Right. So it's easy to take credit for the wins, but blame external factors when things don't go our way. I remember this one time, I invested in a stock based on a tip from a friend. It doubled in value. I was feeling like a Wall Street genius.
Of course, you wouldn't.
But then, a few months later, it tanked, and I blamed everything but my own bad judgment. Classic. Right?
Oh, yeah, totally classic. And it's not just us as individuals, right? This bias also shows up when we look at other people's success.
Like, we assume those super wealthy folks are all just brilliant and hardworking, but we forget about the role of timing, luck, maybe even privilege.
Exactly. It's easy to forget that everyone's journey is different and there's a lot of factors that contribute to success.
Okay, so how do we get better at this? At seeing the role of both luck and risk in a more balanced way?
Well, Housel would say a good dose of humility is key. Recognize that both skill and chance play a role in pretty much any outcome.
So, celebrate the wins, learn from the losses, and try not to let either one go to your head too much. It's a balancing act.
Exactly. It's about understanding the complexity of it all and realizing that there's no single formula for success.
Okay, and that brings us to another big theme from the book, this idea of the never-ending chase. Housel talks about the danger of always wanting more.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. It's like we're on this treadmill, constantly striving for the next thing, never feeling truly satisfied.
Like that saying, the grass is always greener. It makes you wonder, when is enough enough?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And it's a very personal answer. There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
But Housel's point is that this constant striving can actually make us less happy, even if we're achieving material success.
He talks about people who have achieved incredible wealth, but they're still chasing more and more and more, and ends up costing them their relationships, their health.
It's like they reach the top of the mountain, but they're immediately looking for the next higher peak to climb.
So he encourages us to really define what enough looks like for us, what brings us genuine contentment. It might not be what society tells us it should be.
That's something to think about, isn't it? What does enough look like for you, dear listener? What would bring you true satisfaction?
It's worth pondering. Maybe it's experiences, relationships, pursuing a passion. Whatever it is, it's about aligning your financial goals with what truly matters to you.
This actually reminds me of something else Housel talks about, the challenge of staying wealthy. He says it's harder than making it in the first place.
Oh, yeah. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of gains, and make impulsive decisions. We've all seen that happen.
Someone wins the lottery, and then a few years later, it's all gone.
Exactly. It's about having a plan, sticking to it, being disciplined, especially when emotions are running high.
So it's not just about reaching a certain financial milestone. It's about maintaining and growing wealth responsibly over time, no matter what's happening in the market or in your life.
Right. It's like being a pilot flying through turbulence.
Right.
You don't want to panic and make rash decisions. You got to stay calm, rely on your training, and adjust course carefully.
That's a great analogy. So it's about having that steady hand on the financial controls, even when things get a little bumpy.
And this brings us to another interesting concept Housel talks about, tail events. Those are the rare, unpredictable things that can have a massive impact, positive or negative.
Like winning the lottery or facing a sudden financial crisis. It's like that wild card in a card game. It can change everything.
Exactly. These events are almost impossible to predict, but we can prepare for them by building resilience into our financial lives.
So it's like having a financial buffer, that emergency fund, to weather the storms when they come.
Exactly. It's about creating a sense of security and freedom, knowing you're prepared for whatever life throws your way.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about financial freedom. It's a term we hear a lot, but what does it actually mean? I think most people associate it with, a certain lifestyle, maybe being able to retire early or travel the world.
Yeah, those are definitely aspects of it. But Housel digs a little deeper, doesn't he?
Yeah, he defines it as having choices, the ability to live life on your own terms without being beholden to financial constraints.
So it's not just about having a big bank account. It's about having the freedom to pursue your passions, spend your time how you want.
It's about having control over your time, your energy, your decisions, and not being driven by fear or scarcity when it comes to money.
Exactly. And studies have shown there's a pretty strong link between financial independence and overall life satisfaction.
So if you're not constantly stressed about money, it frees you up to focus on what really matters. This is another question for you, our listener. What does true freedom look like to you? What would you do if money wasn't a limiting factor?
Imagine that for a moment. What possibilities come to mind? Maybe it's starting a business, traveling, spending more time with loved ones. Whatever it is, financial freedom is about creating a life that truly reflects your values.
And that brings us to something else Housel calls the paradox of wealth. He challenges this common image of wealth, flashy cars, mansions, all that.
He says a lot of our spending is driven by trying to impress other people, to project this image of success.
But true wealth, he says, is often invisible. It's more about what you don't see.
Right. It's about financial security, peace of mind, having options. It's about the freedom to say yes to things that align with your values and no to things that don't.
So it's not about keeping up with the Joneses. It's about building a life that's rich in experiences, meaningful relationships, and a sense of purpose.
And having the financial freedom to actually live that life without constantly worrying about money.
So how do we shift our mindset from keeping up with the Joneses to building this invisible wealth? Because let's be honest, we're constantly bombarded with messages about what we should have, what success looks like.
Right. It's everywhere. Housel says it's about being self-aware and aligning your spending with your values. Ask yourself, what truly brings you joy? Is this purchase going to actually enrich my life? Or am I just trying to impress someone?
So be intentional with your spending. Don't just swipe the credit card mindlessly. Really think about what you're bringing into your life and why.
Exactly. Ask yourself, does this align with my values? Will this bring me lasting happiness, or is it just a fleeting moment of pleasure?
And of course, we can't forget about saving, which Housel is a big advocate for. He sees it as a way to build resilience, to be prepared for life's ups and downs.
Absolutely. Having a financial cushion gives you that peace of mind, knowing you can handle unexpected challenges without derailing your goals.
So, any practical advice for our listeners on how to make saving a habit, especially if you're on a tight budget?
Start small, be consistent. Even a small amount set aside each month adds up over time, especially with the power of compounding. Think of it as paying yourself first, before your bills, before those little splurges.
I love that pay yourself first. It's such a simple shift in mindset, but it can make a huge difference long term.
And don't underestimate those small changes either. Cutting back on a few unnecessary expenses, like that daily latte or eating out a little less often, can free up some cash for savings.
Speaking of choices, Housel has this really interesting concept. He says, reasonable beats rational when it comes to money. In other words, it's not always about cold, hard logic.
Yeah, our emotions, our values, those matter too. Sometimes the most reasonable decision isn't the one that makes the most financial sense on paper.
It might be the decision that aligns with your personal beliefs, like donating to a cause you care about, even if it means having a little less money yourself.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that money is a tool, and we can use it to achieve not just financial goals, but also personal and societal goals.
I'm curious, have you ever made a money decision based purely on gut feeling? Like it didn't necessarily make sense on paper, but it felt right.
Oh yeah, definitely. Sometimes you just have to trust your intuition, even if it goes against conventional wisdom.
And that's what makes exploring the psychology of money so fascinating, right? It's not just about numbers and spreadsheets. It's about understanding ourselves, our motivations, and how all of that influences our relationship with money.
It's a journey of self-discovery, really.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes this book so valuable. It encourages us to look inward and examine our own beliefs and behaviors.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to take a quick break here, but we'll be right back to dive deeper into the world of the psychology of money. Stick with us.
And you know, speaking of journeys, Housel makes this really interesting point about how the financial world, it's like, well, life, right?
Yeah.
Full of surprises.
Yeah, things rarely go exactly according to plan.
Right. It's like you map out this perfect route, step by step, how you're going to reach your financial goals, and then, bam, life throws a curveball.
A detour, a roadblock, a flat tire, suddenly you're scrambling to adjust.
And Housel says, that's okay. Planning is important, sure, but so is flexibility. We got to be ready to adapt, to change course when needed.
So it's not about trying to control every little thing, but more about being resilient, rolling with the punches.
Exactly. He actually encourages us to embrace the uncertainty. Don't let the fear of the unknown hold you back, Those detours, sometimes they lead to unexpected discoveries.
So how do we get better at this? At being comfortable with the unknown, especially when it comes to something as important as our finances?
Well, it's a mindset shift, right? Instead of trying to control everything, which we can't, it's about being curious, being adaptable.
Okay, so be open to new possibilities, even if they weren't part of the original plan.
Exactly. And, this ties into another concept Housel talks about, the importance of having room for error.
Okay, tell me more about that.
It's like building in a margin of safety into your plans, that buffer zone. To account for those unexpected things that inevitably pop up.
It's like padding your budget a little bit, so if an unexpected expense comes up, you're not totally thrown off course.
Exactly. It's about anticipating those potential bumps in the road, those financial hiccups, and having a plan to handle them.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? How do we create that buffer zone in our financial lives?
Well, one way is to underestimate your income and overestimate your expenses when you're making your budget. It's a simple trick, but it creates that built-in cushion.
That's a good one. I'm always a little too optimistic with my income projections, I think.
And then on the investing side, diversify, diversify, diversify. Don't put all your eggs in one basket,
Right, spread the risk. And of course, we can't forget about that emergency fund. That's like the ultimate buffer zone, right?
Absolutely. It's peace of mind knowing you can handle those financial emergencies without having to raid your retirement savings or go into debt.
All right, now here's something that really resonated with me. Housel says, you'll change. Your goals will too.
It's so true, right?
Yeah.
Our priorities shift over time.
Oh, yeah. What seems super important in our 20s might not even be on the radar in our 40s,
Mm.
And that's okay. Life is all about growth and change. The key is to recognize those shifts and adjust our financial plans accordingly. It's like we got to be adaptable, like a chameleon changing colors.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to revisit your goals, make tweaks, as your circumstances change. What worked for you 5 years ago might not work now.
And this leads to another point Housel makes that I think is really important. He says, nothing's free. Every choice has a cost.
That's a good one. It's like that saying, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Every decision we make, it comes with trade-offs.
He uses the example of buying a bigger house. Sure, it sounds great. More space, maybe a fancy kitchen.
But then you've got higher mortgage payments, property taxes, more stuff to maintain. It's about seeing the full picture, not just the shiny surface.
And sometimes the cost isn't even financial, right? Maybe it's time, energy, or even a piece of your freedom.
Right. It's about asking yourself, what am I willing to give up to get this thing? Is it worth it?
Okay, and this brings us to another point that I think is so important, especially in the personal finance world. Housel says, your money, your way.
There's no one-size-fits-all approach, right? What works for your neighbor, your friend, it might not work for you.
Because we all have different goals, different values, different circumstances. It's like trying to fit everyone into the same size shoe. It's just not going to work.
Exactly. So don't be afraid to experiment, to find what works best for you. And don't feel pressured to follow someone else's path just because it's popular or trendy.
It's your journey. Own it. All right, now let's talk about something that I think is fascinating. Why do we love pessimism so much? Especially when it comes to money.
Oh yeah, we're drawn to the negative, aren't we? It's like our brains are wired to focus on what could go wrong, those potential threats.
It's probably an evolutionary thing, right? Back in the day, being hyper aware of danger kept us alive.
Yeah, but in today's world, it can make us overly cautious, even paralyzed with fear sometimes. All those doom and gloom headlines, they don't help.
It's like we're constantly bracing for impact, which can prevent us from taking calculated risks or pursuing opportunities.
And, Housel actually argues that optimism, even though it's often seen as naive, is a better strategy in the long run, especially for building wealth.
Okay, so how do we cultivate more optimism? How do we shift our mindset from focusing on the negative to seeing the possibilities?
Well, one way is to practice gratitude. Focus on what you have, what's going well in your life, even the small things.
I love that. Gratitude is so powerful. It's easy to get caught up in what we lack, but taking a moment to appreciate what we do have can really change our perspective.
Another thing is to surround yourself with positive influences, people who inspire you, who support your dreams, and who share your optimistic outlook.
It's like building your own personal cheerleading squad. And don't underestimate the power of self-talk either. What are you telling yourself?
Those internal narratives, they matter. Challenge those negative thoughts, those limiting beliefs. Choose to focus on empowering messages instead.
Okay, now this next concept from the book is super important, especially in today's world. Housel says, when you'll believe anything, it's about how narratives, biases, they all influence our beliefs, even when those beliefs aren't really serving us.
We're bombarded with so much information, so much conflicting advice. It's hard to know what to believe sometimes.
It's like navigating a minefield out there. And Housel uses the dot-com bubble as an example, right? How investors got caught up in the hype and a lot of them ended up losing a ton of money.
Yeah, it's a classic example of how following the crowd without doing your own research can lead to disastrous consequences.
So how do we become more discerning consumers of financial information? How do we separate fact from fiction and make choices that are actually aligned with our best interests?
One key is to seek out diverse perspectives. Don't just rely on one source of information. Read different books, articles, blogs. Get a well-rounded view.
It's like getting a second opinion from a doctor. Right. Makes sense.
And be aware of your own biases. What are your preconceived notions about money? What are the stories you tell yourself about wealth?
We all have those stories, right? Sometimes we don't even realize they're there, but they're influencing our choices.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to seek advice from a trusted financial professional either. A qualified advisor can help you develop a plan, navigate those complex decisions.
It's like having a financial coach in your corner, someone to help you stay on track and make informed choices.
Right. Because personal finance, it can be overwhelming. But with the right knowledge, the right mindset, and the right support, you can achieve your goals and create a life of financial well-being.
Yeah, it's like having that expert in your corner to bounce ideas off of, to get that objective perspective.
Right. Because let's face it, personal finance, it can be a bit of a minefield out there. But with the right knowledge, the right mindset, you can definitely achieve your goals.
And that's what Housel's book is all about, isn't it? Empowering us to make those informed choices, to take control of our financial lives.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, Housel has this interesting way of tying everything together in the book, all those seemingly separate concepts.
It's like he's weaving a tapestry, right? All those threads, our habits, our beliefs, they all come together to create this big picture.
Financial success, it's not just about mastering those technical skills or following a rigid formula. It's much bigger than that.
It's about understanding yourself, your motivations, those deep-seated biases that we all have.
It's about developing this holistic approach to money management, one that considers not just your financial goals, but also your values, your relationships, your overall well-being.
Right, because money, it's a tool, right? We can use it to create a life that's truly aligned with what matters most to us.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into the psychology of money, let's take a moment to reflect, what really stood out to you from this conversation?
We've covered so much ground, from the magic of compounding to the importance of patience, from the role of luck to the challenge of defining what enough even means.
But it all boils down to this. Money management, it's more about understanding ourselves than mastering spreadsheets.
So here's a challenge for you, dear listener. What's one small change you can make, starting today, to align your financial habits with your values, with those long-term goals?
It doesn't have to be a huge life-altering shift. Maybe it's setting aside a small amount for savings each week, or finally having that open and honest conversation with your partner about your finances.
Or maybe it's just taking a few minutes each day to really reflect on your relationship with money, to become more aware of those invisible scripts that might be running in the background.
Remember, even small steps, taken consistently, can lead to big changes over time. It's about starting where you are and committing to that journey of self-discovery and financial well-being.
And don't be afraid to seek out resources and support along the way. There are so many books, articles, podcasts, financial advisors, all there to help guide you.
We highly recommend checking out The Psychology of Money for yourself. It's a fascinating read that'll challenge your assumptions and give you a whole new perspective on your relationship with money.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you today. We hope this deep dive has sparked some new ideas, some new insights, and maybe even a little bit of motivation to take those next steps on your financial journey.
Keep learning, keep growing, and keep striving to create a life of abundance, not just financially, but in every aspect of your life.
Until next time.